Green Rush, Mining the Energy Revolution with Matt Watson.
Hello, welcome to Green Rush, Mining the Energy Revolution. I'm your host, Matt Watson. Each week, we take a dive into the periodic table and pick on another element or two. This week, we're going to pick on some unusual elements that most people don't talk about: antimony, vanadium, and REEs. And we have a special guest, Christopher Ecclestone, the principal and mining strategist at Hallgarten Company. Christopher, how are you, sir?
Splendid. How are you?
Fantastic. As I was trying to describe to you, we met a few years ago. I was really impressed with your knowledge. I saw you referenced in a recent article on antimony, which we'll get to in a moment. So I'm just thrilled with this chance to chat with you about these topics. First of all, I want to give you a chance. Can you explain? I got just a screenshot of your company page. Give us some background about Hallgarten Company and what you guys do.
Hallgarten Company, in brief terms, was founded in 1851 in New York. Went bust in 1987, but as a famous old name, we resolved, myself and my business partners at the time, to revive the name in 2003. So it's been going for 21 years now. On the first week of July, 21 years. And in its second reincarnation. But in its first reincarnation, it was one of the famous, our proud investment banks in New York that was related by family ties to the Goldmans, the Lehmans, Seligmans. They were sort of like a gang of immigrants from Germany, and hence the German-sounding name. But it was important in its day, and now it's important only in mining, but that's okay.
All right. And the sorts of services that you offer include what?
We write research on mining stocks. We don't write anything except mining. We do other stuff, which is not particularly visible, like due diligence, valuation reports, business plans, sort of investment banking type thing, except we don't do financings.
Right. It's fantastic. So the three metals we've chosen for today, I have a table I've created which shows the IEA, the U.S. Department of Energy, the EU, and the China, their critical minerals designation hit list, at least the latest that I've been able to find. It looks like all four tag rare earths as being critical minerals. Three of the four, everybody except the IEA, interestingly, picks on antimony, and only the U.S. and the EU are tapping vanadium as being a critical mineral. Any thoughts about why the IEA in particular wouldn't want antimony and vanadium on that list?
Well, the energy applications of vanadium, of antimony, are limited in that the new up-and-coming technology is antimony molten salt batteries, which are used for storage, mass storage. They're not used in vehicles or anything like that. But it's more of a plan on the drawing board than actually something that's got any more practical applications than one or two sort of experimental sites.
Right.
Interestingly, though, they are wrong to the extent that sodium antimonide is a very rising component of photovoltaic cells in solar systems, solar energy systems. It was nothing a few years ago. So many of these surveys, not just that one, but others are very backward looking. They will say, well, what do we think was important last year? But in fact, they're looking even further back because their data is out of date. The USGS, unfortunately, is not what it used to be, and much of its data is out of date. And so people are building sort of sandcastles upon sand. It's a great place to build a sandcastle.
Right. Well, that's interesting. I went to the USGS on this slide here to show the trends on the mine production, and you can see, clearly China dominates this mining space, but we've seen a a pretty rapid decline and loss in mining here. Any sense of what's driving this decline?
This is just not accurate because what they're measuring is the official mines, and what's happened in the antimony space in particular is that artisanals have come along to make up most of that difference that you see there between the peak and where it is now is being made up by artisanal miners, and the USGS, quite justifiably so, can only make at best a guesstimate. So they've decided not to do that at all. And so monitored mines, large operators, are the only things that it can measure. And so all the artisanals that are making up, particularly for the Chinese, the gap between their own falling production is caused by this artisanal factor.
So beyond ammunition, what about flame retardants? What's the landscape look here on these demand space for flame retardants? Lead acid is obviously a pretty stable demand. It's circular demand.
Flat. Lead acid batteries don't take any sort of incremental antimony production because they're almost entirely recycled, as is all the lead in lead acid batteries. So that's like a closed circuit there. The fire retardants are not going up anything more than 1 or 2% a year. The growth item that we know about is the sodium antimonide coatings. And then there's the mystery buying in the defense sector. And, as I was commenting, these wars that are going on at the moment are consuming a whole lot of material, material, as it's called in the defense space. You can't fire bullets and then expect to get the bullets back by running over the other side, collecting them, taking them home and recycling them. So there is a big rundown in the supplies of critical metals that go to the military space because they're being used up in the Ukraine. It's a massive amount of ammunition has gone into that place and into that conflict, and it's not coming back.
Right. Interesting. So interesting. And then here again, referencing USGS data, right, wrong, or indifferent, just the reported reserves. At least we're seeing a slight increase in the reported reserves. And without really knowing what the true demand number is, the best I could do is translate in years of supply from a mined volume perspective, at least as reported. Here, it's showing us that we've got somewhere between 10 to 25 years of supply in mapped reserves.
The USGS has got no clue on antimony resources, I'm afraid to say.
I appreciate the honesty.
The numbers are really well out of date. And I think even the numbers for China, the largest producer, are out of date as well. There's some countries out there that are producing now that the USGS is saying there's no production. And they're currently countries that it says have got reserves where those reserves have been used up years ago. So it's really out of date.
Fantastic. I appreciate
garbage out, I'm afraid.
Again, I appreciate the honesty. So we need to hear that. And here's the price trajectory.
Yes.
And obviously we've seen the price, it looks like we're in a state of, deficit and seeing prices climb. Any thought? Pardon me?
State of panic is what I'd call it, more than a state of deficit. We've got this rise here. I mean, it just doesn't equate to anything that's going on in the fire retardant space. There hasn't been some sort of urgent surge in demand for these things. So something else is going on here. It's a combination of lower supply and higher demand from the ammunition and stockpile.
So now let's turn to the USGS reported reserves for vanadium. Here we see a picture where it looks like there's some 200 years plus of mine supply. What are your thoughts here, Christopher?
I'm dubious about the USGS numbers. I'm just not sure whether they're updated for production that's occurred since they read somewhere that there was a reserve. If one looks at, say, like on a different topic, rare earths, there's potentially phenomenal amounts of reserves.
That's
Because
right.
you go back and you look at all the numbers that were created 10 years ago, and everyone was producing minerals, resource estimates on all sorts of properties. As time goes by, it's discovered that these things are not as viable as we thought. But it is interesting there that, for instance, they've got, 4 countries there, but I don't see Brazil. Brazil's been a big producer of vanadium, one of the biggest, over the last 10 years. Where's
Right.
Brazil there?
Yeah, and they have no data, shown in Brazil over that
Exactly.
interval.
And all that, no, most of that production came from a company, Largo Resources, which is listed on the Canadian Stock Exchange, and all its production and all its resources are out there in the form of reports and news releases. So it's no mystery.
Yeah,
And yet it's not even in the data.
got it. Again, just love the honesty. Here we have now it's USGS reported mine production, China, Russia, South Africa, and here you do see a little bit of Brazil volume from a mine production perspective. But you think this data is bogus as well?
Well, China is at best a guesstimate.
Right.
And who knows? Who knows? The Chinese are past masters disinformation. They want the vanadium price to go down. They will say that they are producing vast amounts and the price goes down because they're the largest buyer of it. But why are they the largest buyer of vanadium if they're producing so much? So it doesn't really sort of gel. It doesn't sort of make sense. People aren't asking the right questions about some of these statistics.
Okay, fantastic. I have interest from a vanadium reflow battery perspective. There's lots of concern in the clean energy community about how do we take these intermittent renewables and store vast quantities of energy as cheaply as possible. And there's limitations to how far you can take lithium batteries in that support role. But vanadium in a pool of material obviously potentially has a chance to hold a significant charge. Do you see anybody really making any breakthroughs on that front from a commercialization perspective on reflow batteries?
The Chinese are selling them, making them and selling them to themselves, because in the West, the uptake of these things has been pretty sort of poor. And it hasn't helped that Elon Musk went out there early on and said, oh, well, you can reuse all our EV batteries by putting them into a farm and then turning them into some sort of like mass storage device rather than recycling them. And the obvious thing is to actually recycle them and put them in other EVs. But so he came up with this idea. And as we saw recently in a big fire near San Diego, these things are quite literally explosive. If you put too many of them together in the sun, where it's super hot, they catch fire. So it's going to take a while for us to get past the Musk factor of disinformation on, the application. But the Chinese are serious about vanadium redox flow batteries. They're doing something about it. But they're doing it mainly for their own use because they're not seeing people line up to buy these things, which is different to the EVs that they're supposedly selling all over the place. Though I don't see these either, but people say they are. I don't know where, because the third world definitely isn't buying it. So, I don't see.
Interesting. We see some stability here in the price as of late. Any expectations of movement here on vanadium price?
Yeah, the price is dire. The price is terrible. The problem here is that the battery makers, the redox flow makers or developers thereof, say that if the price is above $10 a pound, then vanadium doesn't work.
Right.
But the problem is that if it goes under 10 a pound, the people who might get into that business say, we've seen that before, that's a trick. Because as soon as we get into the business, the price is going to go to 15 and we're going to be out of business and we're going to lose our investment. And so this pattern of spikes and dumps and spikes and dumps in the vanadium price has really killed off many of the perspectives for a greater uptake of vanadium redox flow battery technology in the West, because the companies that have the technology just cannot sell it, because they cannot guarantee to buyers that the price of the batteries is going to remain low and remain viable against alternatives because of this this spike and dump phenomenon that we keep seeing in the vanadium market, which I also think, dare I say, is Chinese price manipulation to try and keep other people out of the vanadium space.
Right. Well, like you said, it has an impact on sustainability as well. To recycle it, you need to have some intrinsic value to make it cover the treatment charges of recycle, and too often these sorts of
one of the advantages, at least, of VIPs is that they have a 20-year mine life, most of them.
Right.
Whereas an EV battery has guaranteed life of 8 years, and pretty much that's it. Whereas the vanadium redox flow batteries can last 20 years, and then you can recycle them 100%. They don't have all this black mass involved with them that lithium-ion batteries do, which complicates recycling there. So vanadium redox flow batteries are like poster child, really, for recycling.
Right. Interesting. All right. Well, let's shift topics once again here to your favorite rare earths, the 17 rare earths, which are highlighted there on the periodic table. And just to highlight for the listeners, the number of applications, it's really quite endless. It's quite substantial. And yet when you roll up the numbers and you study it a little bit more closely, clearly the magnets are by far the dominant demand, both making in magnets or anything producing sound from speakers or earphones. Of course, these magnets are used in EV motors, and actually motors of all sorts within automotive, and up to a ton of material of rare earths and wind turbines as well are really some of the primary applications, and the wind and the EVs being the key clean energy transition topic, but a vast array of potential applications. And just to give our listeners a picture of demand, you can get a sense here: magnets, catalyst, including auto catalyst. We're finding lots of lithium and cerium, and on in terms of applications. So just to give our listeners a little bit of background in terms of demand in this sector. So it's a fascinating space, again, with recycling limitations due to the price of these materials. So it really limits your sustainability actions. Lots of people, we can recycle, but again, the treatment charges are just more expensive than the metal that you get out. And as you discussed already, Christopher, the USG has reported mine production is pretty strong, and we have years and years of supply, in excess of 300 years worth of supply, and mapped out deposits already.
For once, I'd agree with the USGS.
For once you agree. Now, the problem that I have is even the U.S. populations over time, even though there's mining, a lot of that ore body ends up in China for processing anyway. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah, no, absolutely. The Chinese have sort of cornered the market on the processing, but that's breaking down now. I think, it's not a subject that keeps me awake at night, because I'd say within 5 years from now, a vast percentage, and by that I mean several tens of percents, are going to be moving out of China into the West control. So maybe 30, 40%, 50, maybe more of rare earth magnets are going to be produced outside China. Already the Japanese companies that were producing magnets in China are decamping. In fact, the Japanese government is subsidizing them to move to other places like Vietnam, the Philippines, to get out of China, because the Chinese have been technology thieves in this space for a long time, and they've been basically sucking the brains of the Japanese corporations and making off with the technology. In rare earths, in many ways, it's the applications that are evolving and advancing, but the subject of the actual magnets is not actually all that different to what it was 20 years ago. Right. And come back to the subject of recycling. The two biggest uses out there all the rare earths, and the rare earths are sort of consequence, are the EV sector, for engines, where they're used, the magnets, and
Right.
the magnets used in the wind turbines. And all of these are very recyclable. The problem that you have is with the sort of the more minor rare earths. For instance, europium used to be used in colored TV sets. It was used in the cathode ray tubes to produce the red color. In the image you are looking at. All of those screens were basically dumped into landfill and broken, and people shot at them, rocks at them, or whatever they did for a bit of a thrill. And none of that europium was ever recycled out of those TV sets. And they say that light bulbs have, the incandescent light bulbs have some infinitesimal amount of rare earths in them. People basically break them and throw them in the trash, or they end up as being recycled glass rather than being recycled rare earths. And the other problem is with many of these sort of micro, nano-sized magnets, and a good example is the magnets in your cell phone that makes it vibrate, come from terbium. Those magnets, basically, when the cell phones are done and people chuck them in their trash, or they end up in some landfill somewhere, no one is going in and pulling out this infinitesimally small terbium magnet and saying, oh, golly, I've got this thing, it's worth a lot of money, because it isn't. Even at the prices of a kilo of terbium, it's not worth recycling. It's not worth someone's while to go in there and pull that tiny little thing out, put it in a bucket or box or whatever, and send it to some recycling center where you would need the terbium magnets of like 1,000 phones to make 1 kilo of terbium. No one's bothering.
No, and again, I know for a fact from a number of my clients, people like BSF and Umicore and a few others have looked at recycling in the e-waste space. And you're absolutely right. If you shred it as part of the larger body of goods, it's too low grade and just too difficult to extract. Not that you can't extract it, you can, but at great expense, and it's just economically underwater. And I think there's a breakthrough, Christopher, going on in the e-waste recycling segment, if you will, in the segregation. And I think Apple is leading the way. If you read Apple's sustainability report, they remarkably cite nearly 100% recovery rate of their magnets. And I've had a number of clients ask, well, how is that possible? And I'm sorry I don't have a slide of it, but you can look it up and Google it. But Apple has devised a disassembly robot. They've nicknamed Daisy, and now they've created a number of these robots where you can stack a series of phones, let's say i7s, i8s, or whatever phones or pads. They know the part number. The robots know how to tear it down. And they'll take, for example, titanium parts, throw it in a titanium recycle pile. They take the magnet materials, put it in a magnet pile. And what's interesting is, even then, again, the economics of that recycle are questionable, but I think they're in touch with a group, and you can look it up, Christopher, Novion Magnetics in San Marcos, Texas, that's using a powder metallurgy process where you have a very specific pile of magnets. There's no pollution. You grind it up. You demagnetize the material. You grind it up into a powder, reform it into the next generation magnet, remagnetize the material. And I'm told when you do a general hydropyro type of recycle on rare earths, that the magnets can lose 10+% of their Gauss, of their magnetic strength. With this powder metallurgy process, it actually gains strength. And so it's a complete recovery with actually a stronger magnet coming out the back end. And it's believed that's how Apple is doing what it's doing. And so I think there's a message here to your point. Selective disassembly can lead to more precise recycling at more economical terms that will make these processes viable. And so the next trick, of course, is how do you scale that? How do you scale that to these half-ton or one-ton wind turbines? And unfortunately, I think the way they assemble those, too many of these EVs and windmills are not built with disassembly and recyclability in mind. You have to have that thought in the design phase. But I think there are some processes that can be developed that are going to be economical for those magnets that aren't used today. I don't know if you have any thoughts there.
No, I'd agree. Yeah, as you say, the phones are put together by robots, so they can be
Right.
disassembled by robots as well. The problem is you've got to get the phones back.
Right.
So they may say at Apple that they've got 100% recyclability of a phone, but they don't have 100% recyclability of all their phones because their phones are not coming back.
Right.
I have a little collection here because I've been saving for like 10 years all the cell phones that pass through this household, and I have a metal bucket full of cell phones, and none of those have gone for recycling. They could all be disassembled, but they haven't. And people have drawers and drawers of this stuff if they haven't thrown them in the in the trash, and they're not getting recycled. So how many iPhones are actually migrating back to Apple's facility where they pull them apart, where Daisy does her work,
Right.
is a mystery.
Exactly. And I have that same drawer next to my bed as well. So I have the same pile.
Yeah.
I think we all do. And no,
Yeah.
you're absolutely right. I've got, this is too detailed to walk through, but I wanted to kind of give people some background information on the price. And what I've done is I've extracted the tonnage as best I'm able to extract, and price times the volume and demand volume, and put this in a total available market revenue picture, if you will, over time. And of course, in 2022, like so many commodities, we saw a price spike, especially in neodymium, central to those neodymium, iron, boron, magnets, along with the other key magnet materials. And I think the message here is it's interesting how these three REs out of the 17 dominate, well over 70% of the total market revenue in this particular year, with some 90% of the revenue. So really, even though it's a complex basket of materials and a lot of unique applications, really three drive a big picture of the revenue. I don't know if you have any thoughts there.
Yeah,
But
no, absolutely. Most of the plans that are out there for developing rare earth mines, production facilities, have the lanthanum and cerium as throwaway products.
Right.
Because they have uses, but they don't have uses on the scale that people would need to deal with all this extra volume that's coming out of them. And you mentioned, lanthanum is used in lubricants, but suddenly if you double the amount of rare earth production out there, you double the amount of lanthanum, and the lanthanum price, which is already, you could scrape it off the ground, is going to get even lower. Right. And the cerium is in a worse scenario because the cerium is mainly used in ceramics and not high value ceramics. And so it's not a good picture.
Right. I do want to point out, in terms of recyclability, the scandium, this is a very interesting metal. In fact, one of my favorites, when alloyed with aluminum, very interesting strength and rigidity evolves. It pairs better with steel and for welding, and can influence automotive as well as airplanes. So to me, this is a sleeper metal. But there's some 200 tons a year of scandium that are mined, presumably. I have one client alone that's recycling 40 tons a year on his own. So there's quite a bit of recycle, I think, going on in the scandium space. I don't know if you have any thoughts there.
Well, scandium, for a start, isn't a rare earth, but there's a bit of a misnomer that's been circulating around for like 13 years now, because some company put it in the rare earth collection, but it's not a rare earth.
Oh, really?
So by the lanthanide series at all, it's just sort of rare. And actually, compared to many of the rare earths, it's rarer. But
Exactly.
production's going up with scandium, and you're absolutely right. Scandium is has phenomenal potential benefits in the aircraft industry. By being combined with aluminium, it can lighten the weight of planes by 20%. And in this day and age, you can imagine if the plane's lighter, then the fuel consumption is lower. And so aluminium, scandium alloys are a brilliant potential. The problem has been that the big aircraft manufacturers have not wanted to retool for scandium as an alloy because they cannot be guaranteed enough production. So it's a very much a chicken and egg situation where if you can't get enough production, you're not going to actually use it. And if you don't use it, then the people who've got scandium deposits, and there are a few scandium deposits, not a lot, but a few in Australia that could be developed, but they're not being developed because the aircraft manufacturers have not tooled up to use the product because they don't think they can get the product. So it's a totally circular conundrum. There's been partially broken by the fact that Rio Tinto are extracting scandium from past aluminium refinery waste in Canada, in Quebec, and that's adding to the global supply. And longer term, if Rio Tinto become big players in the production of scandium, and they did buy one of these mine projects in Australia, then the big counterparties, the big end users like Boeing and Airbus will finally say, okay, we've got a big company that can guarantee us supply, not some teeny little junior who says, I can produce 5 tons a year. That does not move the dial. Well, we need companies out there that can produce hundreds of tons a year.
Exactly.
Because, that will change the mindset of Boeing.
Right. And that's why I'm so interested in scandium. I think its clean energy potential is just so profound. It's known. We just need the material, and then the designers can act on that more productively. And it really has a huge potential. The other one on scandium, just real quick, throw it at you, Christopher. It's being used now in SAW and BAW filters, what they call acoustic wave filters or RF frequency filters. So as we've moved into 4G and 5G, you're using more and more of the RF spectrum. All these devices have more and more of these RF frequency filters. And what they're doing now is they're using aluminum scandium in PVD thin films, doing sputtered layers within kind of embedded packages, more complex semiconductor packages, if you will, with the filters embedded. So we're seeing a pretty big growth there. Interesting. So a new demand in the electronics genre, just to make sure you're aware of that. But at the heart of rare is what drives us all nuts, and I'm sure you agree. And I call it my red light special here is the ESG aspects of this. It seems to be a mess, right? There's some 2,000 tons of toxic waste produced for every ton processed. The way the Chinese are doing it, it's fairly well documented. It's a nightmare. It just is just disgusting how they're managing these sites. I've heard stories where they're doing sulfuric acid dissolution. They're getting a jump on it by injecting, the mining hillsides with it just to get a jump on dissolution. And then, with all this waste, number of these sites are dumping it in unlined acid lakes out back. One of them is as large as 6 miles in diameter. It's just absolutely a train wreck. And I don't know if you have any comments there, but I love the point that you brought up that we're trying to bring this into the West. We're trying to bring this mining and processing greater into the West. We absolutely have to. I don't know how we could claim to be clean energy advocates using this material. It's just disgusting. Would you agree?
Yeah, no, but it's a Chinese way with a lot of stuff, whether it's graphite or fluorspar. These products create lots of waste, which tends to stay in China. But at the same time, the CFCs, with the carbon fluorocarbides, coming out of graphite production facilities now are making the ozone layer disappear again after we had a big crisis 40 years ago, and it started to get fixed because the West removes these gases from air conditioners and refrigerators. The Chinese are using enormous amounts of it, and they're now the mystery source of CFCs in Asia. It's not much of a mystery, but no one's prepared to call them out on it. because, the West is supping at the trough of the end products. Well, one interesting thing that's happened now compared to 10 years ago is that the monazite sands, which are a source of rare earths, were sort of verboten 10 years ago because of their radioactive content, either uranium or thorium. Now the West is learning to love the radioactivity and removing the radioactivity from the sands so that they can be processed. And certainly monazite sands are a lot easier, a lot less damaging to the environment when they're ultimately processed than hard rock sources of rare earths are. So this is very much a rising phenomenon, and the US is becoming itself a producer of rare earths, aside from production that comes out of Mountain Pass, because monazite sands in the US are having the radioactivity removed, and then they're being sent off to be processed into rare earth oxides that can go back into the magnet production chain of the West. Right. So who knew?
Fantastic. Well, Christopher, I think we've covered a lot of ground relatively quickly. I appreciate your time. I don't know if you have any closing comments or thoughts that you'd like to share.
No, the antimony space is the one that I'm most involved with, because I don't think that there's a supply crisis in either of the other metals. Vanadium has lots of supply, and if the supply that comes from Brazil or from because 1/3 of all vanadium actually isn't mined. 1/3 of vanadium comes from as a byproduct of petroleum refineries. So it's extracted from oil and gas, or from oil. And so particularly heavy crudes, Venezuelan type crudes, have a very high vanadium content. So it's removed from there. So it's not really an issue. The antimony is more of an issue, and it's a problem not just for the West, it's a problem for China as well, because China's own production is falling, and the artisanals, the swing factor in recent years are ultimately limited because they don't have that much material. It's being brutally exploited at the moment. They're getting paid hardly anything for it, but someday it will all be gone from these artisanal sources, and then that's going to be a real wake-up call. And I think that's where we are at the moment. I think there's been a lot of Chinese reliance upon Laos, Honduras, Bolivia, Burma, these type of places for artisanal supplies, and they're running out. Or that the easy pickings aren't there anymore, because artisanals can only mine the first few meters. Once they get down to the water table, they stop. And so that's why you've got a ultimately big problem in antimony, and it's not going to go away.
Okay. Well, fantastic. Again, appreciate your time, Christopher. Thank you so much.
Thanks. Ciao. Bye-bye.
No, thank you. So join us next week. We're going to talk gold and potentially silver, platinum, palladium, and rhodium as well with Pete Thomas. So join us next week for that one. Like and subscribe, people. Thank you so much. Take care.
Green Rush, Mining the Energy Revolution with Matt Watson.